minimum SPAC is kind of about $50 million. SPACs tend to target a company in the 3 to 5x range. As Neil said, they have somewhat displaced the reverse merger market in that you're not cashing out. They're not really buying the company in a traditional M&A. They're issuing their stock to buy a company, 3 to 5 times their size. And essentially that company is using this as a capital raise, equivalent to the SPAC amount plus the PIPE amount, less the amount of the SPAC that gets redeemed as part of the transaction. $50 million SPAC is going to look to buy a company worth $150 million kind of at a minimum. From those of us who, outside the IPO market, the regular IPO market, that's kind of a small IPO. And so, it's a company that's going to be a little bit younger, or maybe a little bit less structured than a traditional IPO candidate. So, unless your company target can legitimately say it's $150 million EV, even as Neil indicates that the values are somewhat pumped up, it's hard to do it as a SPAC. And, Hai's comment about, a company looking to raise $35 million for a greenfield project, the structural limitations on a SPAC is they have to spend at least 80% of their money that's in the SPAC on their first transaction or transactions if you were to do multiple at the same time. So it's not a functional equivalent of a PE or venture capital investor vehicle that can, be used that way. I mean, a SPAC in Hai's case would have to buy that entire vehicle, and you'd have to argue that entire company is worth, $150 million, and the same thing for Michelle's company. And if you can get there, then it can be a liquidity event. But then, of course, the problem is, much like an IPO is not a liquidity event for the founders, a SPAC, the de-SPAC, is not a liquidity event for the founders of the company going into the SPAC. They may get some cash out, but for the most part, they're going to be asking, as part of the proxy and the de-SPAC process, for investors to stay in the company, for the PIPE investor to stay in the company. And the fastest way to get your deal to fail is to look like you're a seller at the same time as you're asking everybody else to be a buyer. And so it is not necessarily a de-SPAC is not necessarily a liquidity event for the company selling into the SPAC. You're taking over that company and becoming an IPO. So from the target's perspective, you should view it the same way as an IPO. You're going to be locked up for 180 days and everybody's going to watch you trying to sell in the future.